These are notes on honeybees and colony loss, just to give you a little bit of background, give you some terminology so that we're all on the same page, and kind of bring everybody up to speed. Some of you may raise bees at home, and so you know a lot more about bees. Some of you may really not know much about bees. These notes mostly have to do with the honeybee as opposed to the bumblebee or any of hundreds of different species of bees. So we're going to talk a little bit more about all those other species later, especially when we view the TED Talk in class, but these notes specifically have to do with the honeybee. Honeybee being, not surprisingly, the bee that makes honey. It is not a native bee to the United States. It's not indigenous. It was brought over by European settlers, but it has been here hundreds and hundreds of years and is responsible for pollinating a large percentage of our agricultural crops. So there are three different castes of honeybees. You have, in the middle here, we have the queen, and there is one queen per hive, and her entire goal is to make more bees. We have the drones. So the drones are over here, and the goal of the drone is to impregnate the queen to make more bees. And then we have the workers, and the workers run everything else that doesn't have to do with impregnating the queen or being the pregnant queen in the hive. So they take care of the young, they go out to get pollen and nectar, to feed the bees in the hive, they work on making the structure of the hive, they pretty much do everything else. And the way it works is if the queen's eggs are fertilized, they become either workers or queens. So all the workers are actually female. And when they are in their larval stage, they're actually, all of them are treated as if they are going to be queens. But then at some point, the workers stop being fed this substance called royal jelly, and they develop into workers, and the queen gets to stay the queen. If the hive needs a new queen, then one of those workers may be selected to become the new queen. If the queen's eggs are unfertilized, then those eggs develop into drones. And we're going to talk more about what this means later this year when we get to genetics. It's interesting because it means the workers and the queen are what we would call diploid, and the drones are haploid. And you don't normally see that in animals. And you don't have to worry about those terms right now, but it's kind of cool, and we'll talk about it later this year. So honeybee colony loss. You've maybe heard like the bees are in danger, the bees are disappearing, what's happening with the bees, we need to protect the bees, and maybe really not know anything about what all is going on. So there's something called colony collapse disorder, or CCD, which is where a majority of the bees do not return to an otherwise healthy hive. So bees don't leave their hive really at all. I mean, they'll leave to go get pollen, to go get nectar, but then they come back. Bees don't decide like they're going to move to Florida and just fly off. If a hive becomes overpopulated, then you may get a swarm of bees that swarms to form a new hive, but otherwise you don't find bees flying off, not coming back, deserting their young, deserting their queen, and when this happens, the hive dies, and it's called colony collapse disorder. And generally the idea, because bees don't simply fly off to Florida because they feel like going south for the winter, the bees that have not returned have also died. So that's what colony collapse disorder is. In about 2004 to 2006, somewhere in there, beekeepers began reporting about a 30% loss of colonies due to CCD. CCD is not a new thing, but to lose 30% of your hive was a very new thing. And so that was really concerning. Since 2006, CCD sort of fluctuated up and down. There still seems to be about a 30% loss of hives each year, which is more than you would want, but it's possible that not all of it is from CCD. Some could be from like poisoning of the hive or other things. So a way to tell whether it's CCD or whether it's something else like local poisoning is that if the bees die in the hive or around the hive, that's not CCD. CCD is when a majority of the bees don't return. But there's certainly a lot of stuff out there that's killing bees. And what we're going to see in the TED Talk is that 30% loss so far has been able to be maintained and made up for, and we'll look at why. But it's a lot more expensive to replace hives rather than to not lose them in the first place. So it's a pretty big deal, and who knows how sustainable we'll be in the long run at maintaining our bee population. So there are a couple of possible culprits, and depending on what you read and who you read, and if you do your own research, I really encourage you to be very careful about biased sources. There are some sources that are incredibly biased one way or another, so we'll talk a little bit about bias. But bees are one of those things actually where you can find a lot of bias, so you have to be very careful at the sources you choose. So some possible culprits are parasites. So this, let me get my marker here. This red, really ugly red guy, and he's got like little stickers here that stick in the bee. If you look them up online, they're really nasty and gross. But these are called varroa mites, and they're actually, their term is like, their scientific name is like Varroa destructor or something like that. They can only reproduce within a bee colony, and they latch onto the bees. Some bees will have more than one, and they weaken the bee's immune system and kill off the bee. And that could be a culprit of colony collapse disorder, because the bees could then fly away and not be able to find their way back. There are other parasites as well, but this is one of the most prevalent ones and one of the biggest bee killers. Another culprit is insecticides. So there is a new line of chemicals being put into insecticides, I would say in about the past 10 years, and they are called neonicotinoids. And you can kind of break that word down. They are related to nicotine. So nicotine being the drug in cigarettes that people get really addicted to. And there's some thought that those neonicotinoids have a pretty severe effect on bees. They're not designed to kill bees, certainly. Most things aren't designed to kill bees. Bees are seen as definitely a beneficial insect, but that they do, in fact, harm bees. And you can look up, if you use bug and insect killers in your yard, you can actually look up which ones have neonicotinoids in them and which ones don't. And then habitat loss is another one, and that has to do with then bee nutrition. So here are some pictures I took last summer. I went on a trip to Chicago. You can see these are my two lovely children out right in front of a very beautiful sculpture. But of course, in order to make room for this sculpture, they had to do a lot of paving. I mean, you know, this is in the middle of Chicago, so right downtown there's a lot of big buildings. There's a lot of big buildings, there's not a lot of flowers for bees. And in fact, here is a really nice park. This was on the 4th of July. This here again is my daughter with her nice American flag and the nice soccer shirt. This was right before the United States women's team won the World Cup. And you know, you think even in big cities they have these nice beautiful park areas. So see, we're getting ready for a nice outdoor concert. It's this nice green space. Those are actually called green deserts, because other than grass, nothing really grows there. So again, it's not a habitat for bees or other pollinators. So we're going to be looking at these different culprits and seeing what we think and seeing if there's anything we can do about them. So now you have a little bit of background on the bee issue. Please feel free to put questions and comments on YouTube or ask them in class. Have a good night.